raised about Syria, because I've come to the floor to speak about the historic and extraordinary events that are taking place in Syria, where for the past 3 weeks, the Syrian people have been peacefully and courageously taking to the streets of their cities. And I want to talk particularly about what may happen there in Syria in the next 24 hours. What's happening, of course, in Syria is part of a broader story that's unfolding across the Middle East, a democratic awakening in which millions of ordinary people are rising up against corrupt autocratic regimes that have ruled the region and suppressed these people for decades. But the strategic stakes in Syria are among the highest anywhere in the region. In fact, I'd say what happens in Syria in the coming days will have far-reaching consequences for the future of the Middle East and for our national security here in the United States. The uprising in Syria began, like those in Tunisia and Egypt before it, spontaneously and unexpectedly. It rose from the people, not from outside. It began in the city of Dara, in southern Syria, near the Jordanian border, after the Assad regime arrested a group of school children there. When the citizens of Dara began peacefully assembling to protest this absurd act of repression, the police responded by firing live ammunition into the crowd. Rather than being intimidated by this violence, however, the protest movement persisted and spread. Although the Assad regime is trying desperately to prevent accurate information about what's happening inside Syria from reaching the rest of the world, it is clear that people in many cities around the country are now in open revolt against the Assad regime. From Latakia to Aleppo, and from the Kurdish northeast to the villages along the Mediterranean coastline, more and more Syrians from diverse backgrounds are rising up and demanding their freedom. And what exactly are they asking for? It's the same basic demands we hear throughout the region, and they're very familiar, should be, to the American people, because they're the very demands that energized and motivated our rebellion, the American Revolution, and the founding documents of our country. The people of Syria want greater political freedom, and they want economic opportunity. They want into the modern world. They want to be treated with respect by their government, and they want an end to the culture of corruption and impunity that surrounds the Assad regime. And how has Bashar al-Assad reacted to these legitimate grievances? The answer is he has responded not by offering reform, but by unleashing what President Obama has rightly characterized as abhorrent violence and repression against the Syrian people. He's responded with thugs and militias who have attacked peaceful protesters. He's responded by spouting conspiracy theories rather than loosening his autocratic grip. And as we know now, he has responded by calling on his allies, his patrons in Tehran, to help him crush the demonstrations by the Syrian people. Just as the regime, the fanatical, extremist, expansionist regime in Tehran, stamped out the protests that took place in Iran after the June 2009 election. Madam President, it's now clear what path Bashar al-Assad is on. Rather than pursuing reform, he is taking a page from the Gaddafi model. He is betting that he can beat his people into submission through force, and that the world will let him get away with slaughter. Let's be very clear what it means if Bashar succeeds. It will send a most perverse but unmistakable message that leaders like Mubarak and Ben Ali in Egypt and Tunisia, respectively, who were allied with the United States, get overthrown. but leaders like Assad, who are allied with Iran, survive. Is that really a message we want to send? Now, what about tomorrow? Why do I focus on the next 24 hours? Madam President, tomorrow is likely to be a critical day for the future of Syria as protesters come together after Friday's prayers. There is a significant danger that it will also become a very bloody day if Assad continues on the path of violence and brutality against his own people. This is therefore an urgent moment for American leadership, at least for America's voice to be heard. It is important for President Assad in Damascus to know today, before the protests that are likely to take place throughout Syria tomorrow, that his regime will be held accountable for its actions. And I hope we will be prepared to act quickly together with the world community if Assad fails to heed the will of the Syrian people and tries to hang on to power through repression and murder. What can we do? Well, to begin with, we can impose tough and targeted sanctions on the Syrian officials responsible for the human rights abuses that are being perpetrated against their own people. We can also work with our allies to summon a special session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, just as we did in the case of Libya. And we can refer Assad's regime to the International Criminal Court, just as we did with Gaddafi. We should also embrace the Syrian opposition, the freedom fighters. I hope senior American officials will meet with prominent Syrian dissidents who are here in Washington now. I also urge the administration to speak out clearly in support of the Syrian people who deserve praise for their courage as they risk their lives for freedom and human rights. They must know that the United States, still the beacon of liberty in the world, stands on their side. In the face of attacks by the Syrian regime, Syrian protesters have remained remarkably peaceful, just as the protesters in Tunisia and Egypt before them did. In the face of sectarian provocations by Assad, the people of Syria who are protesting have remained together, unified, giving a message of national unity. Now, I know that some have suggested that we should hesitate before throwing our support to the Syrian opposition, to the Syrian people as they rise up, and this argument goes like this: Bashar al-Assad is the devil we know. We don't know what might replace him if we fail. We don't know what might replace him if he fails. But we know enough about Bashar al-Assad to know, and we know enough about the opposition to know that it cannot be worse than Assad and will be much better. The arguments that we should wait and see are, in my opinion, moral and strategic nonsense when you look at the record of Assad. He is Iran's most important Arab ally, in some senses, Iran's only real Arab ally, and the strategic linchpin between Iran and its terrorist proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, whom he sustains with financial and military support. Assad is responsible for a terrible campaign, long-standing, of intimidation and destabilization of Lebanon. And the blood of Lebanese leaders, too many of them, is on his hands, including that of the great Lebanese leader, Rafik Hariri. As Senator Cornyn said, Assad also has the blood of countless American soldiers on his hands, having allowed Syria to be used for years by foreign extremist fighters affiliated with al-Qaeda and their link to head to Iraq to attack and kill Americans and Iraqis. And finally, let's not forget Syria's illegal nuclear activities. This is a regime that tried to build a secret nuclear reactor, and they did so with help from North Korea. This is a regime that continues to refuse to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency in its investigation of Syria's illegal nuclear activities. The plain fact is that Bashar al-Assad is not a reformer. He is a dictator. He runs a totalitarian regime that has long been one of the worst in the Middle East. This is a regime that has repressed, intimidated, and in fact, tortured and slaughtered the Syrian people. It is a regime that is deeply corrupt, and it is a regime that has been a menace to its neighbors and to the cause of peace throughout the region. Madam President, we now have an opportunity, and I'd say a responsibility, to support freedom for the Syrian people as they seek a better future for themselves. It would be a shame if they and we lost this opportunity for the Arab Spring to come to Syria. I hope that together with our allies, we will seize this moment and stand in solidarity with the people in Syria who are fighting for the fundamental values that our own country was built on: freedom and opportunity. I thank the chair and yield the floor. And I would suggest the absence of a